My son gambled away our ancestral home. The house my grandfather bought with his life savings, the only home our family has ever known. After the bank foreclosed, he had the nerve to stand in our new bleak rental apartment and blame me. He thought our legacy was gone forever. He didn't know about the secret my grandfather, a wise old man, had hidden in the original deed nearly a century ago. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know, I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps more people become aware of the reality of elder abuse. Now let me tell you what really happened. My name is Naomi Johnson, and at 71 I am the keeper of stories. Not just my own, but the stories of those who came before me, etched into the very floorboards of the house on Sycamore Street. This was not just a house. It was a legacy, a testament. It was bought nearly a century ago by my grandfather, Samuel Johnson Sr., a sharecropper with calloused hands and an unshakable faith, who saved for 30 years to buy this small piece of America for his family. It was the first home our family had ever truly owned, a symbol of our journey. My father was born in this house, I was born in this house, and I had raised my own son, Franklin, in these same rooms. It was the place I dreamed my own grandchildren, little Sam and Maya, would one day measure their heights against the doorframe, just as their father had. After my own dear husband passed, this house became my sanctuary, my companion. It was my only real asset, paid off long ago, a quiet fortress of memories. But a fortress, I have learned, is only as strong as the loyalty of those within its walls. My son Franklin was my greatest joy and my deepest sorrow. At 45 he was a man of immense charm and charisma, but he was afflicted with a sickness of the soul, a secret that had been gnawing away at our family for years, a severe, insatiable gambling addiction. It had started small, a weekly poker game, a few trips to the casino. But it had grown into a monstrous, all-consuming beast. He had lost jobs, friendships, and his own self-respect to the relentless, seductive whisper of the next big win. His marriage had crumbled under the weight of his deceit, leaving my grandchildren caught in the crossfire of a life built on instability. I had tried everything. I had pleaded, I had prayed, I had given him my own small savings to pay off debts, each time believing his tearful promises that this would be the last time. Each time I was wrong. He came to me on a Tuesday, the air thick with the promise of a spring storm. He looked terrible. His expensive suit was rumpled, his eyes bloodshot and full of a desperate, hunted terror. He told me he was in deep trouble, deeper than ever before. He had borrowed money from the wrong kind of people, not a bank but loan sharks, and the debt with its ruinous interest had ballooned to a staggering sum. "They're going to kill me, Mama," he'd wept, his large frame shaking with a fear that seemed genuine. "They gave me 1 week. 1 week to come up with the money, or they're going to hurt me. Badly." He painted a vivid, terrifying picture of their cruelty. Whether it was the truth or just another manipulation, I did not know. But looking at my son, my only child, so utterly broken and terrified, my mother's heart could not take the chance. "What do you need, Franklin?" I had asked, my voice a quiet whisper. He told me the sum, a number so large it stole the breath from my lungs. It was a fortune far beyond anything I had in savings. "There's no way, Mama," he'd sobbed as if reading my mind. "It's over. I'm finished." But then he looked at me, his eyes full of a new, desperate, calculating hope. "Unless," he began, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The house, Mom. It's our only option. It's paid off. It's worth a fortune. If we take out a mortgage on it, just a small one, we can get the cash. I can pay them off, and then I swear on my father's grave I will get help. I will get a new job, a better one, and I will pay back every single penny. For you. For Sam and Maya." He knew my weak spot. The grandchildren. The thought of them losing their father, of their lives being thrown into chaos and danger because of his debts, was an unbearable prospect. The house. My ancestral home. The legacy of my grandfather. To put it in the hands of a bank, to use it as collateral for my son's gambling addiction. The thought was a sacrilege. It was a betrayal of everything my family had worked for, had stood for. "No, Franklin," I'd said, my voice shaking. "Anything but that. Not the house." But he was a master of manipulation, my son. He wept, he pleaded, he spoke of his terror, of the violence he faced. He spoke of his children, of their future. He preyed on my deepest fear, the fear of losing him, and the fear of his failure destroying the lives of my innocent grandchildren. For 3 days he worked on me. He wore me down with his tears, his promises, his carefully orchestrated terror. And finally, my love for him, a love that had always been my greatest strength and my most profound weakness, won out over my better judgment. With a heavy heart, a heart that felt like it was betraying the memory of my ancestors, I agreed. I went with him to the bank, my hands trembling as I signed the mountain of paperwork for the mortgage. I saw the look of triumphant relief on his face as the loan officer stamped the final document. He had won. I received the check from the bank, a life-altering sum made out in my name. I signed it over to him, my own signature a testament to my foolish, desperate hope. "Pay them off, Franklin," I'd said, my voice stern. "And then, so help me God, you will get help. For your children's sake." "I will, Mom," he'd promised, hugging me tight, the check clutched in his hand. "I swear it. This is the new beginning for us." As I watched him walk away, a check representing the soul of my family's legacy in his pocket, a cold, sickening premonition washed over me. I had not just signed over a loan. I had just bet my entire history on a man who had proven time and time again that he was the worst gamble of all. The weeks following my fateful decision to mortgage our ancestral home were filled with a fragile, manufactured hope. Franklin, my son, was a new man. He was attentive, cheerful, full of grand plans for the future. He swore to me that the loan sharks had been paid in full, that the danger had passed. He even showed me a brochure for a high-end gambling addiction treatment center, promising he would enroll as soon as his new business venture stabilized. This new venture was his justification for everything. The mortgage money, he explained, had not only cleared his debts but had also provided him with the seed capital for a surefire investment. He spoke of stocks, of market trends, of a guaranteed return that would allow him to pay back the mortgage in a matter of months. I, who had lived a life of simple, tangible assets, of saving what you earned, understood little of this new world of high-risk finance. But I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. To believe otherwise was to admit that my ultimate sacrifice had been for nothing. I thought of my grandchildren, Sam and Maya, and told myself this risk was for their future stability, for a father who was finally getting his life on track. So I let him weave his tapestry of lies. I watched as he bought new expensive suits for his investor meetings. I listened as he spoke on the phone in a language of confident, empty jargon. The first mortgage payment was due and he made it, showing me the confirmation with a proud flourish. "Hey, Mom. Everything is under control." But the second payment was a few days late. "Just a small cash flow issue," he'd assured me. "The market is a little volatile." The third payment was over a week late, and it came only after a tense, registered letter arrived from the bank. The lies began to unravel as lies always do. The business venture was a fantasy. The late-night investor meetings where I came to realize high-stakes poker games in the back rooms of smoke-filled bars. The money, my house's equity, was not being invested. It was being hemorrhaged, a relentless, desperate bleeding at the altar of his addiction. The foreclosure notice arrived on a Tuesday, a stark, official-looking envelope that felt as heavy as a tombstone. I opened it with trembling hands, though my heart already knew what it would say. Notice of default and intent to foreclose. The words were a death sentence for my home, for my family's legacy. He had missed 3 consecutive payments. The bank was calling the loan due. We were going to lose the house. I confronted him that evening, the letter clutched in my hand, my body shaking with a mixture of rage and profound, soul-deep sorrow. "Franklin," I said, my voice a raw whisper, "what have you done?" He looked at the letter, his face a mask of feigned surprise, then dawning, theatrical despair. He sank onto the sofa, his head in his hands, and began to sob. But his tears this time did not move me. I had seen this performance before. "I tried, Mom," he wept. "I really did. The market, it turned against me. It was a bad investment." "There was no investment, was there, Franklin?" I asked, my voice cold hard. "There was only the gambling. You lied to me. You took the money and you threw it away. You've lost your children's birthright." He looked up then, and the mask of sorrow fell away, revealing the ugly, sneering face of his true self. A cornered, defiant man with no one to blame but himself, and a desperate need to find another scapegoat. "It's your fault," he spat, his voice a venomous hiss. "All of it. If you had just given me more money sooner when I first asked, I could have covered my losses. I could have gotten ahead. But no, you had to be so cautious, so controlling with your precious little savings. I stared at him, stunned into silence by the sheer monstrous audacity of his accusation. And your financial advice, he continued, his voice rising in a hysterical crescendo as he warmed to his theme. You with your safe little bonds and your don't touch the principal nonsense. You know nothing about the modern world, about how real money is made. Your old-fashioned, timid advice. It crippled me, made me second-guess myself. If I had just followed my own instincts, I would be a millionaire by now. But I listened to you. I listened to my wise old mother, and now look. We're losing everything because of your incompetence. He had done it. He had taken his own catastrophic failure, his addiction, his lies, his theft, and he had laid it all at my feet. In his twisted, self-serving narrative, I was the one to blame. My prudence was incompetence. My love was a liability. I looked at my son, the man I had given everything for, the man who was now spitting poison at me to deflect from the rottenness of his own soul. And I felt nothing. The love, the pain, the hope, the despair, it all vanished, replaced by a vast, cold, empty void. He was a stranger, a cruel, pathetic stranger who had infested my life, my home, my heart. The foreclosure proceeded. The house, the home my grandfather had built with his own 2 hands, the legacy of a century of our family's struggles and triumphs, was gone, lost to the bank, a casualty of my son's sickness and my own blind love. We were forced to move, to find a small, bleak rental apartment on the other side of town, a place that smelled of other people's failures. As we packed the last of our boxes, Franklin was silent, sullen, treating me with the angry contempt of a man who truly believed he had been wronged. He saw himself as the victim, and I, in his eyes, was the villain, the foolish old woman who had cost him his fortune, his future, his family home. He had pointed the finger at me, and in his own deluded mind the accusation had stuck. But I knew the truth, and I had a quiet, desperate feeling that this story, our story, was not yet over. The small 2-bedroom rental apartment on the other side of town was a special kind of hell. It was a place devoid of memory, of history, of love. The beige walls seemed to absorb the light. The thin carpet was stained with the ghosts of other people's lives, and the air was thick with the scent of stale cooking and quiet desperation. It was here, in this purgatory of rented rooms, that I truly began to mourn. I mourned for my husband, for the life we had built. I mourned for my son, for the man he might have been. But most of all, I mourned for my home and for the legacy I had failed to protect for my grandchildren, Sam and Maya. The thought of them, of their bright futures now clouded by their father's catastrophic failures, was the sharpest pain of all. The house on Sycamore Street was meant to be their anchor, their connection to a proud, resilient past. I had envisioned them playing in the same yard their great-grandfather had tilled, their laughter echoing in the same hallways their father had run through as a boy. Now that was all gone. And a part of me felt a crushing weight of guilt. Franklin was right about one thing. I had failed. I had failed to protect our family's legacy from him. Franklin, who now shared this cramped, depressing space with me, was a constant, sullen reminder of my failure. He would spend his days in his small room, the door closed, emerging only for meals, which he ate in a resentful silence before retreating back into his self-imposed exile. He still blamed me. In his twisted logic, my inability to produce a magical solution to his self-inflicted financial ruin was the ultimate betrayal. My days were long and empty. I had managed to save a few small boxes of sentimental items from the house before the bank took possession, and it was in sorting through these remnants of my former life that I found a small measure of solace. Old photographs, my wedding dress yellowed with age, my mother's china, my father's pocket watch. And at the very bottom of a dusty box filled with my grandfather's old papers. His military discharge, some letters, old property tax receipts from the 1930s. I found it. It was the original deed to the house on Sycamore Street. A thick, vellum-like document, its text written in the elegant, looping script of a bygone era, its edges brittle with age. My grandfather, Samuel Johnson Sr., had been so proud of this deed, the first he had ever held in his own name. I remembered him showing it to me when I was just a little girl, his large, calloused hand tracing the words. "This, Naomi," he had said, his voice full of a quiet, powerful pride. "This is more than just a piece of paper. This is our foundation. This is a place no one can ever take from us. A wave of profound, heartbreaking irony washed over me. No one could take it from us. Except our own. I kept the deed not for any practical reason, but as a memento, a final, painful connection to the legacy that had been lost. I would sometimes take it out at night in the quiet of my small room, and run my fingers over the faded ink, over my grandfather's strong, determined signature. It was a relic of a better time, a time of pride, of hope, of a family united. One afternoon I was looking at the deed again, my heart aching with a fresh wave of grief, when I noticed something I had never seen before. Tucked into the final dense paragraph of legal jargon, a section I had always skipped over, was a small, almost imperceptible annotation, written in my grandfather's own hand. It was a single sentence, its ink faded almost to invisibility. I retrieved my strongest reading glasses and a magnifying glass I kept for threading needles. I held it up to the light, my breath catching in my throat as I deciphered the faint, spidery script. It was a clause, a strange, archaic-sounding one. It spoke of a family right of redemption. My heart began to pound, a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. I read the sentence again, then a third time, my mind struggling to comprehend its meaning. It stated in clear, though old-fashioned legal language that in the event of the property ever being lost to foreclosure by a financial institution, any direct blood descendant of Samuel Johnson Sr. would have the undeniable right to redeem said property from the lien holder for the sum of $1, a right that superseded any public auction or private sale. It was a fail-safe. A final, brilliant, almost unbelievable act of foresight from a man who had known hardship, who had likely known the predatory nature of banks and lenders, and who had been determined with every fiber of his being to ensure that his family's foundation could never truly be lost. He had built a secret escape hatch into the very DNA of our home. Could it be real? Could such a thing even be legal in this modern world? It seemed like something out of a fairy tale, a long-shot hope too fantastic to be believed. But as I held that old, brittle document in my hands, a new feeling, one I hadn't felt in months, began to stir within me. It was a tiny, fragile, but fiercely defiant spark of hope. Franklin had called me incompetent. He had called me a failure. He had blamed me for losing our home. He thought he knew everything about the modern world of finance. But he knew nothing of the old world, of the quiet wisdom of his own ancestors, of the promises etched in faded ink on a dusty old piece of paper. This was not just about me anymore. This was about my grandfather's legacy. This was about my grandchildren's birthright. I carefully folded the deed and placed it in my handbag. I didn't know if this right of redemption clause would hold up in a modern court of law. I didn't know if I had the strength to fight for it. But for the first time since the foreclosure notice had arrived, I felt like I had something other than my grief. I had a secret. I had a story. I had a weapon. And it had been left to me, waiting silently for over 70 years, by the quiet, brilliant, and incredibly wise man who had started it all. My grandfather had given me one last story to tell. And it was going to be a story of reclamation. The old deed felt like a warm, living thing in my handbag as I took the bus downtown the next morning. The spark of hope that had ignited the night before had grown into a small, steady flame, a fragile light in the overwhelming darkness of my despair. I knew my first step had to be seeking professional counsel, to find out if my grandfather's eccentric century-old clause was a legal fantasy or a tangible, powerful weapon. I couldn't afford a high-priced lawyer, not anymore. My savings were gone, my new life a careful balancing act on a meager pension. So I went to the one place I knew I could find help. The Legal Aid Society, a place I had once volunteered at as a young woman, a place that believed in justice for those who couldn't afford to buy it. I was assigned to a young lawyer named Alistair Finch. He was sharp, energetic, with kind, intelligent eyes that held a fire for his work. He listened patiently as I laid out my story, my voice trembling at first, then gaining strength as I spoke of my family's history, of my son's addiction, of the foreclosure, of Franklin's cruel, misplaced blame. When I had finished, he shook his head, his expression a mixture of sympathy and a familiar, weary anger at the injustices of the world. "Mrs. Johnson," he said, "what you have endured is a profound tragedy. Your son's actions are, frankly, reprehensible." "I am not here for sympathy, Mr. Finch," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I am here for answers." I slid the old, brittle deed across the desk towards him. "I need to know if this, I tapped the final paragraph with my finger. Is real. He took the document with a careful, almost reverent touch, clearly impressed by its age and historical significance. He read through it, his brow furrowed in concentration. When he got to the final section, the family right of redemption clause, he stopped. He read it once, then a second time, a look of stunned disbelief dawning on his face. "My word," he breathed, looking up at me, his eyes wide. "I have never in all my years of practice seen anything quite like this. A hereditary right of redemption for a symbolic sum, written directly into the original deed transfer. This is extraordinary. But is it legal, Mr. Finch?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Is it still valid?" "That," he said, a slow, excited smile spreading across his face, "is the $100,000 question, isn't it? Or in this case, the $1 question." He leaned back in his chair, his mind clearly racing. "The language is archaic, certainly, but it is also precise. It appears to be a legally binding covenant that is attached to the deed itself, something that would transfer with the property title through any subsequent sales or, in this case, a foreclosure. The bank, in their modern high-volume title search, likely would have missed or dismissed such an unusual, antiquated clause. They would have seen a clear title transfer upon foreclosure and assumed full ownership." He stood and began to pace his small office, a new energy in his step. "This is fascinating. A true legal unicorn. We will have to do some serious research into historical property law and precedent. But my gut, Mrs. Johnson, my gut tells me your grandfather was a very, very smart man. He may have just built a legal time bomb into the foundation of your home." The next few weeks were a flurry of intense legal research by Mr. Finch and his team of young, eager law students, all of whom seemed to have adopted my case with a passionate, almost personal fervor. They dug through dusty law books, searched digital archives, and consulted with property law historians. And the conclusion they reached was astounding. The clause, as eccentric as it was, appeared to be unassailable. It was a legally recorded encumbrance on the property, a condition of ownership that had been grandfathered in through decades of unchanged title law. The bank, when they foreclosed, had taken ownership of the property subject to all existing covenants and encumbrances. They had, in their modern bureaucratic haste, completely overlooked this strange, powerful clause from a bygone era. They owned the house, yes, but they did not own it free and clear. My family, my direct bloodline, still had a claim. A $1 claim. The day Mr. Finch called me with the final confirmation, I felt a wave of dizziness so profound I had to sit down. It was real. The hope was real. The weapon my grandfather had left me was real. "We are ready to proceed, Naomi," Mr. Finch said, his voice ringing with a triumphant confidence. "We will be formally contacting the bank's legal department tomorrow, presenting them with the original deed and our legal argument. We will be exercising your family right of redemption." "And what if they fight it?" I asked, a tremor of my old fear returning. "Let them," he said with a sharp laugh. "The last thing a massive, publicly traded bank wants is a newspaper headline that reads, 'Banking giant forecloses on 71-year-old widow's ancestral home, refuses to honor $1 buyback clause drafted by her sharecropper grandfather.' The public relations nightmare alone would be catastrophic for them. They will bluster, they will threaten, but in the end, Mrs. Johnson, they will fold. Your grandfather has them in a checkmate from a century ago." A slow, powerful smile spread across my face. Franklin, my son, had called me old-fashioned, incompetent, a relic of a bygone era. And he was right. My power, my salvation had come from that very place. From the old world, from the quiet wisdom of an ancestor he had never known, from a promise etched in faded ink on a dusty old piece of paper. The glimmer of hope was now a blazing fire, and it was about to consume my son's arrogant modern world. The formal letter from Mr. Finch's office to the legal department of City National Bank was, he later told me, a work of art. It was polite, professional, and utterly devastating. It calmly outlined the history of the property on Sycamore Street, presented a certified copy of the original deed with the family right of redemption clause highlighted, and formally stated my intent, as the direct blood descendant of Samuel Johnson Sr., to exercise my legal right to redeem the property for the symbolic sum of $1. The bank's initial response was, as Mr. Finch had predicted, a mixture of incredulous disbelief and arrogant dismissal. Their high-priced corporate lawyers sent back a terse letter stating that my claim was frivolous, without merit, and based on an antiquated, unenforceable clause. They considered the matter closed. "They're bluffing," Mr. Finch had said with a grin when he called to update me. "They're trying to intimidate us. Now we apply pressure." Our next move was to file a formal legal action in county court, a petition to enforce the redemption clause, along with a lease pendens on the property, a legal notice that would effectively prevent the bank from selling my home to anyone else while the matter was in dispute. We also very quietly leaked the story to a single well-respected journalist at the city's main newspaper, a woman known for her in-depth stories on housing rights and corporate malfeasance. The combination was a strategic masterstroke. The bank's legal team, faced with a legitimate, well-researched lawsuit and the looming threat of a public relations nightmare, suddenly became much more cooperative. Their tone shifted from arrogant dismissal to frantic behind-the-scenes negotiation. They knew, just as we did, that a court battle they were likely to lose, played out on the front page of the newspaper, would be a disaster for their public image. After 2 weeks of tense negotiations between their lawyers and Mr. Finch, they folded. Completely. They sent a formal letter agreeing to honor the redemption clause, citing a desire to resolve the matter amicably and in good faith. I knew it was not good faith. It was a surrender, a desperate attempt to avoid the public shaming that awaited them. The day of the closing was one I will never forget. It was not held in a fancy title company office, but in the bank's own intimidating glass and steel corporate tower, a place designed to make ordinary people feel small and insignificant. But as I walked in, leaning on Mr. Finch's arm, I did not feel small. I felt like a giant killer. We were led into a vast, silent conference room. 3 of the bank's top lawyers sat on one side of the enormous mahogany table, their faces grim, their expensive suits looking like funeral attire. They looked at me, a 71-year-old woman in a simple Sunday dress, as if I were some strange, inexplicable force of nature that had disrupted their orderly world. The paperwork was already laid out. Mr. Finch reviewed every document with a meticulous eye. Then he nodded to me. "It's all in order, Naomi." From my worn handbag I produced a small, simple checkbook. With a steady hand I wrote a check, payable to City National Bank, for the grand sum of $100,100. I signed it with a flourish. I slid the check across the polished table. One of the lawyers, a man with a face like a clenched fist, picked it up, holding it between his thumb and forefinger as if it were a dead insect. He then pushed the final deed transfer documents towards me. I signed my name, my own signature, now the one that mattered, the one that held all the power. The deed to my ancestral home, the legacy of my grandfather, was once again officially, unequivocally mine. As we stood to leave, I paused at the door and turned back to the 3 grim-faced lawyers. "Please extend my regards to your collections department," I said, a small, cold smile on my lips. "And let them know that any future communications regarding my son, Mr. Franklin Johnson, should be directed to his last known address. I believe he is no longer a resident of Sycamore Street." The walk out of that corporate tower was a triumph. The sun was shining, the city air felt fresh and clean. My home was mine again. My grandfather's wisdom had reached across a century to protect me, to deliver a justice so perfect, so poetic. It was almost overwhelming. The bank filed the new deed with the county clerk that very afternoon. The public record was updated. My name was back where it belonged. Franklin, my son, had no idea. He was still living his small, resentful life in that bleak rental apartment across town, likely still blaming me for the loss of his house. He assumed it was gone forever, another asset liquidated by a faceless bank. He had no idea that I, his incompetent old mother, had just bought it back. For $1. The final part of my plan, the part where he would learn the truth, was yet to come. And it would be a lesson he would never, ever forget. The first inkling Franklin had that his world had been irrevocably altered came not from me, but from a cold, impersonal letter from the bank. I had made sure of it. As part of our settlement, Mr. Finch had insisted that the bank formally notify Franklin that the mortgage debt on the foreclosed property at 12 Sycamore Street had been resolved and the title transferred, and that he was no longer a party of interest. Franklin, I imagine, would have read this with a bitter, resentful satisfaction. He would have assumed it meant the house had been sold to a stranger, its history erased, the final chapter of our family's connection to that place closed forever. He would have felt a pang of loss, yes, but it would have been quickly overshadowed by his own self-pity, another grievance to add to his long list of my failures. I gave it a week. A week for that false reality to settle in his mind. Then I made my move. I didn't call him. I didn't write him a letter. I simply went home. I hired a small moving company, and one bright Tuesday morning, I moved my few cherished belongings from my bleak rental apartment back into the house on Sycamore Street. It felt strange at first, like walking into a memory. But as I unpacked my mother's china, as I placed my husband's photograph back on the mantelpiece, as I set my grandchildren's smiling pictures on the side table, the house began to feel like mine again. It was a quiet, profound reclamation. I waited. I knew word would get back to him. Our old neighborhood was a place of close ties and even closer gossip. It happened 3 days later. He appeared on my doorstep, his face a mask of pale, stunned disbelief. He just stood on the sidewalk staring at my house, at the familiar wreath on my front door, as if he were seeing a ghost. "Mom?" he finally stammered, walking slowly up the garden path. What are you doing here? How is this possible?" "The bank. They sold the house." "No, Franklin," I said calmly, opening the screen door but not inviting him in. "They didn't sell it. They honored the terms of the deed. I bought it back." He stared at me, his mind clearly unable to process the information. "Bought it back? What? You have no money." "I have all your money, or what was left of it." The slip, the casual admission of his own theft, was telling. "I have my grandfather's foresight, Franklin," I said, my voice cool. "Something you seem to be sorely lacking." And then I told him. I told him about the family right of redemption clause, the $1 buyback, the legal unicorn that had saved our family's legacy from his reckless hands. As I spoke, his face went through a remarkable series of transformations, from confusion to dawning comprehension, then to a raw, furious envy, and finally, to a look of utter, pathetic desperation. He realized in that moment what he had lost. Not just the house, but the story, the legacy, the quiet, powerful magic of his own heritage, a heritage he had so carelessly, so arrogantly dismissed. So it's yours again," he whispered, his voice a raw croak. "And my inheritance?" "Your inheritance, Franklin," I said, my voice as cold and as final as a judge's gavel, "was the love and support of a mother you chose to betray. Your inheritance was the history and the home you chose to gamble away. You have already received it, and you have already spent it." I looked him directly in the eye. "This house, this legacy will be placed in a trust. A trust for your own children, my grandchildren, so that they might one day learn the value of family, of history, of a grandfather's love, lessons you so clearly failed to grasp. You will not be a trustee. You will not have access. You will not benefit from it in any way." I then delivered the final word. "You are no longer welcome in this house, Franklin," I said, my voice quiet but unshakable. "You blamed me for losing it. Now you can live with the knowledge that it was I who saved it. From you. Goodbye." I closed the door gently in his stunned, horrified face, and for the first time in a very long time, I turned the deadbolt with a sense of absolute, profound peace. My revenge was complete. It was not a fiery, emotional outburst, but a quiet, legal checkmate, a victory orchestrated by the wisdom of an ancestor and the resilience of a mother who had been pushed too far. Franklin was left with nothing but the consequences of his addiction and his profound disrespect. He had gambled away his family home, and I, his incompetent old mother, had bought it back for the price of a gumball. I walked through the quiet rooms of my ancestral home, running my hand along the familiar worn wood of the banister. My grandfather's legacy was safe. My future was secure. And my son had finally been taught the most important lesson of all, that the foundations of family, of history, of love, are more powerful than any fleeting promise of a jackpot win. And that was a truth worth more than any amount of money.